Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Sorry I haven't been making videos in a while, but I've been adjusting to new life as a dad. So that's right, my wife just gave birth to our first child, Fira Capri Martin. She's an amazingly beautiful young girl, but it has kind of caused a little bit of havoc with our schedules, and we're trying to figure out how to be new parents and how to adjust to the lack of sleep and things like that. But things have finally started to kind of normalize a little bit, and I've been able to come back to work, and now I've been able to start making videos like this again, which I'm really excited to do. Now, in my last video, I talked a lot about depression, and I do intend to continue that series and talk a little bit more about what causes depression and what are some practical things that we can do to combat depression when we have it. But in today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening in our country right now, because I think it would be very weird if I didn't address it and give you guys some thoughts on what I'm thinking and how I'm processing these events. So basically, I'm not going to attempt to make any type of political stance here or to go about looking at the ideas of systemic racism and the police and things like that. But instead, what I want to look at is I want to look at a more spiritual aspect, how I believe that this behavior is impacting our culture, where it comes from, and what we can practically do about it. And in order to understand these things, I'm going to be looking at a couple speeches given by Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s. The first one is called The Other America, and it's an incredible speech, and I encourage you guys to look it up and watch the whole thing on YouTube or to get the transcript. And the other speech is called Loving Your Enemies, which is more of a sermon that he gave, but it's incredible, and like I said, it really gives the DNA of what he believed about what was happening in his time and what they could do to fix it. So the first quote that I have for you guys, I'm going to be looking at what his major issue was, and his major fear, beyond his fear of racism that was occurring during his day, but he actually had a different fear, and it was a big one. It was definitely, if not his greatest fear, his second greatest fear. And that was the motivation of hatred and how it impacted the civil rights movement and how it would impact our country as a whole. What he believed is he believed that if we allowed a movement to be propelled by hatred, it would destroy the movement itself as well as the country that it was moving in. And this is a quote from Loving Your Enemies, and this is what he says. Hate serves to destroy. Love serves to build. Hate seeks destructive ends, and love seeks constructive ends. Hate seeks to annihilate. Love seeks to convert. Hate seeks to live in monologue, love seeks to live in dialogue. And it is only through love that we are able to redeem and transform the enemy neighbor. And so when Jesus says, love the enemy, he's saying, love the enemy because there is something about love that can transform, that can change, that can arouse the conscience of the enemy. And only by doing this are you able to transform the jangling discords of society into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood and understanding. So from his mind, hatred would only seek to destroy our country, whereas love could actually build our country back together and make it united, which was what his intent was and why he dealt with peaceful non-resistance as opposed to rioting and looting. Now, I do have to point out that he didn't look at the rioting and looting and the hate-filled movements of his day and say, I totally don't understand where these people are coming from, and condemn them outright. Instead, he looked at them and said, I completely understand where you are coming from. He saw slavery, he saw systemic racism going from Jim Crow laws to black codes to segregation in schools and various things like that. He looked at them and hated them just as much as these other people did. However, what he endeavored to do is not allow that hatred to control him and to completely compel him to condemn the entire country and people in general. Instead, what he used is he allowed hatred and anger to fill him, and he aimed it at the particular injustices that they needed to be aimed at, and he forgave the people that did it, which enabled him to walk in love, which he believed was key to keeping our nation together as opposed to tearing it apart. So why is it that hatred is to be feared? What did he think about it? Well, the first thing that he saw about hatred is that hatred doesn't really know when to stop. It doesn't really know when to say enough. So because of that, hatred keeps going until it destroys the very cause that it seeks to propel. So, for instance, he used the riots that were happening in his day in Watts, and he looked at them and he said, look at these people. They're going out and they're rioting and they're looting, but they're looting their neighbors. They're rioting in their own cities and they're burning down their own neighborhoods. So he says a man goes out and he riots all day, and then he comes home to realize that he accidentally set fire to the very home that he intended to sleep in that night. He's saying the hatred is blind, it's unreasoning, it's unthinking. It does things that are destructive without knowing it. So if you were to look at what's happening in our day to day, he would look at it and say, the people that are rioting and looting, they're doing the same thing. They're rioting and looting in the very cities that they hope to live in. They're destabilizing and hurting the very economy that they rely on. And they're attacking the police force whom they depend upon for safety. They're even saying to defund it. Which brings me to my next point. That hatred not only is blind and unthinking, but hatred also encourages people to do things that they know instinctively to be wrong, because hatred seeks to paint an entire entity as being evil, as opposed to being able to see evil parts of it while praising the good parts. So for instance, if I'm dealing with someone who is victimized or brutalized as a child, it's easy for that person to look at the person that abused them as some sort of a subhuman animal that treated them that way. That would be the easy thing to do. The more difficult thing to do would be to look at that person and to see them as a human being. To say, yes, they did evil things. Yes, they did wrong things. Yes, there was very, very wicked parts of them. However, there were also good parts of them. They were a human being. They weren't a demon from hell. And in the same way, it's not enough for someone who's been abused to look at their abuser and say, you did wrong things. You have to condemn the entire person. You have to condemn them in their entirety and consider them to be a monster. And in today, it's not enough for us to look at one cop who did something stupid and horrendous and say, yes, Derek Chauvin was a monster. Instead, we have to look at the entire police force as being corrupt and systemically racist from the ground up. We have to look at every cop that's worn a badge and say that they're terrible and corrupt and they're the reason why people are getting hurt in our streets today. We can't just look at one instance of racism inside of our society and condemn it. We have to look at our entire society and burn it from the inside out. We have to say our entire society is racist and our entire society is wrong and needs to be destroyed so that we can build something better. Martin Luther King didn't do that. He never did that. Instead, he looked at the society that he lived in and he said, the foundation of America is beautiful and good. The flaw in America is that the beautiful foundation is not afforded to all citizens equally. He fought for equality for his fellow blacks within a system that he adored. He did not seek to tear down the system, but he instead sought to bring the system to all people equally. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. endeavored to do. Why was he able to do that? Because he wasn't controlled by his hatred. He was able to look at the individual acts of racism and condemn them openly and vehemently, but he also was able to see the good in this country. And that's something that people propelled by hate will never be able to do. So, because of that, and in light of that, what did he think we needed to do about racism, about hatred? What was his solution if hatred was going to be such a bad and negative thing? Well, I believe he answers that question in his very great speech, Loving Your Enemy. And this is kind of like the end of the speech. This is what he says. We must learn to say to all those reactionaries who have blocked the road to progress, we will match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure it. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. We cannot in all good conscience obey your unjust laws, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. So put us in jail, and we will go with humble smiles on our faces, still loving you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and we will still love you. Send your propaganda agents into our country and make it appear as though we are unfit to live with you morally and culturally, and we will still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our communities at the midnight hours. Drag us into the streets and beat us and leave us half dead. We're still going to love you. But be assured, we will wear you down. Not by our capacity to inflict harm, but by our capacity to endure it. And one day, we will win our freedom. But not only will we win freedom for ourselves, but we will also appeal to your heart and conscience so that we will win you in the process, and our victory will be a double one. This seems to me to be the only answer to make our nation whole and to make a new and abounding world, for love is the absolute power. So in his mind, he's saying, man, if we give in to hatred, we're going to become just like the people that we hate. The oppressed is going to become the oppressor. Because what is it that enables the white supremacists to oppress and to hurt the black and the minority? Isn't it his belief that the black and the minority are inherently inferior to him? Yet, when Martin Luther King Jr. was looking around at his contemporaries, like for instance Malcolm X did not believe in desegregation. He believed in segregation. Why? Because he believed that the white man was inherently evil, and therefore he didn't want to segregate with the white man. He believed the same things that the Ku Klux Klan believed in that in that whites and blacks could not be segregated, and in that they should be completely separate because one is inferior to the other. He became what he hated. And Martin Luther King Jr. was afraid of that. He was afraid of that hatred, but he believed so powerfully that love could conquer that type of hatred, not only in oneself, but also in the life of the one that was causing the harm. That is why in the Bible you have the apostles say things like, do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. Where is it that they learned this valuable lesson? And where is it that Martin Luther King Jr. learned this valuable lesson? Well, it was in watching a man named Jesus of Nazareth being marched out on trial in front of the Jews and the Romans, condemned in the most unjust fashion, beaten half to death and scourged in a courtroom that would have been considered entirely unjust by anyone's standards, and crucified half naked on the highway to be mocked and ridiculed by all those coming in. And what did they hear that man do on the cross? Did they hear him yell at his enemies? Did they hear him shake his fist and say, God smote these people for what they have done to me? No. They heard him say, God, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. The Christian ethic of forgiveness and love is not the ethic to say we're not going to look at sin and we're not going to look at wickedness. We're just going to ignore it and pretend like everything's okay. That's not the Christian ethic. For remember, Jesus had to die because of the injustice in this world, meaning that God looked so unflinchingly at the evil and the wickedness of this world that he could not look away, and he had to die on our behalf. But because he died on our behalf, it gives us the ability to look at the people that are evil and wicked in this world, and instead of seeing them as irredeemable monsters and animals, we can instead see them with humanity. And we too can forgive them and seek their benefit as well as our own. So yes, for those people who are marching, and there are some peaceful ones out there, and I commend you, but for those people, I hope that some of you are watching it who do support the rioters and do support these crazy claims to defund the police and things like that, that you would think through this and say, are some of my ideals propounded by hate? Have I been consumed by hatred so much that I can't forgive my enemy, that I can't love them, that I am becoming just as blinded to my hate as Martin Luther King Jr. believed I could be? And the same way, those of you guys who aren't, do you look at the rioters and the looters and these people, and are you filled with hate towards them? Are you now reacting towards their behavior and saying these people are just idiotic and stupid and we should just totally condemn them? Are their actions evil? Yes. Are their thoughts to be condemned? Absolutely. But should we condemn the person? Should we become just as violent and reactionary as these people are? No. How do we do that? We have to learn, as Martin Luther King Jr. did, we have to learn to meet oppression and violence with love and forgiveness. For it will not only heal our own soul from the bitterness that's ravaging our heart, but it will also heal the country as a whole. In the next video, I want to talk a little bit more about what the Bible does say about racism in general and how it does heal us in the sense of our need for justice and things like that. But for now, I just want you guys to sit on that thought, that what we should be praying for, what we should be endeavoring to do is to not be filled with hatred and to react to the violence around us, but instead overcome evil with good, and to think about various and practical ways that we can do that in our communities. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you later.